All right. So today we're going to go over working with JavaScript frameworks, and we're going to look at Ember. So pretty much all JavaScript frameworks are built on top of another technology called Node.js, and it's kind of like a JavaScript runtime for either doing like build tooling or writing JavaScript on the server. So you may have heard of other languages like PHP or .NET, Java. You can usually write that on the back end. You can also write JavaScript on the back end with Node. So that's kind of like one case. The other case is a lot of people use Node for tooling. So if I want to take, like when I'm building a website and I have all these scripts, and for performance wise, it's actually better to kind of take all these scripts and turn them into one single JavaScript file and remove like all the white space, like that kind of stuff. People write programs to do that process using Node. And so a lot of the frameworks, they kind of ship that sort of functionality out of the box, and they come with their own command line that's kind of built on top of Node. So first, before we kind of get in, we have to install Node. So I think a few of you have experience with working with it already. If you don't, hopefully you saw my message. Go ahead and go to nodejs.org and download it. You can download either the LTS or the current. I think I'm on the current, so I'm using 10. Does anybody not have it already? Okay. Yeah, just head to Node.js and download the current. And if you do have it, go ahead and open up Terminal. I'm going to CD to my desk. Actually, let me go to my school stuff. Okay, so once you open up Terminal, when you install Node, you should have the command line node, so you can do that. So if you do like node -- version, you can spit out the version number that you currently have. I have 10.6. For the most part, I don't think it really matters a whole lot. And as a side note, there's also another tool called, for those of you who have already installed it, you don't have to do this today, it's kind of up to you, but there's a nice tool out there called MVM. It stands for Node Version Manager. And so sometimes you have like different projects that do depend on different versions of Node. And so it's really nice to, be able to have multiple versions of Node on your computer. So if you need to switch between them, it makes the process really easy. So you don't have to like just reinstall like version 7 and then you go to the next project and it's 10. You have to go back to, reinstall version 10. It makes the process pretty simple. So my Node version is actually running on MVM. So just kind of so you can see it, like I have a few different versions installed on my computer, but currently I'm just most of the time referencing my 10.6 one. So nice little tool if you haven't heard of it.
Do we need to download this?
No, this is just FYI. You can get by today with just doing this. Just kind of like in the future if you want to check it out. I think a lot of people end up using it.
So should we have the left or the right one?
I would probably go with the right, the current. Okay, so we have Node installed. Now to start working with Ember or React or Angular, any of these frameworks, they all kind of come with a command line tool or a CLI. And to install that CLI, we're going to use Node. And Node has a package manager, so you can kind of like download different libraries, and it's called NPM. It stands for Node Package Manager. And the way we can kind of look up different packages online is we can go to npmjs.com. And this basically is kind of a site to search for a bunch of packages. So if I wanted to search for things like validation, you can see all kinds of stuff. So if you want to like pull different libraries, this is kind of the spot to go if you're working with Node. So the one that we're going to be working with is Ember CLI. So if I click on this, kind of look, has the same like documentation as GitHub, and it'll tell you like what's the current version. Okay, so how do we install this? So the way we install this is we say npm install -g ember-cli. So the ember CLI is kind of the name of the package that you see on npm, and the -g, it stands for global. And what this means is it's going to install this this library globally on my computer. So it's not like a per project library, because a lot of libraries are just per project, right? In this case, this is more of just like a command line tool, so it's just global for my entire computer, because I'm going to be using Ember CLI to create new projects and create other things. So if you want to go ahead and run npm install -g Ember CLI,
This is error.
oh, yeah, okay. That's also another, okay, so how many did it error out for? Okay, good chunk of people. So if you install Node this way, it you can't really run npm-g Ember CLI or really any other a lot of libraries globally. What you actually have to do is run it with sudo. So you say sudo npm install -g Ember CLI. It kind of restricts you from installing global things without the right permissions and stuff, because it doesn't want you to like infect your computer. So if you've installed Node via this way, you're gonna probably have to run this, and that's kind of also another reason why a lot of people I think also use NVM. It kind of installs it in a certain place so that whenever you install things globally, it puts it in a spot that doesn't have that doesn't require more elevated permissions. But the installation's a tad more complicated, and that's why I didn't really want to get into it a whole lot. Just FYI. So go ahead and run this. It's fine for now because it's Ember CLI is pretty trusted. But in the future, it might be good to check out NVM. Yes.
You can also put it in. There's a way to configure Node to have it run local bins instead of.
Okay. Yeah, maybe share it in the chat if you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so did the sudo work? Okay, cool. So if you've done that, then you should be able to do ember -- version. And it will spit out kind of the version of the CLI, what version of Node you have, and then your OS. Do you guys see this? Cool. Okay, so typically with web projects, we just manually create folders and files, and that's what I kind of did in the previous demos. With all these modern frameworks now, they have this CLI tool that will scaffold out your entire application. So the way we do this with Ember is we say Ember new, and then we give it a name. So in this case, I'll say, let's see, we'll call this week. What week is it? 5. Thanks. Okay, week -5. And so what this is going to do, it's going to create a project, and it's going to install a bunch of libraries, also using npm behind the scenes, since Ember depends on all these little packages that kind of make up the entire framework. And then it also initializes Git. So remember that command git init that we did inside folders to create a Git repository? It does that for you too. So now if I do ls, we'll see, okay, I created this week 5 folder. So I'm going to cd into week 5. You can do this anywhere on your machine if that's what you're asking. Oh yeah, Ember new.
Oh, Ember.
Oh, yeah. And then
He just listed it. He just did it. Okay. Oh, wait, did you?
we'll create a new folder. The name of the-
So if you cd into week 5, we can actually run git log, and it kind of git log is another command that will tell you what are all the commits that I've made. So it just it says initial commit from Ember CLI, so you can see it kind of made a commit just to scaffold out the project. To exit out of this, type in Q.
What did you do?
Oh, if you type in git log, it kind of puts you in this weird little mode. But to get out of it, just hit Q. You didn't have to type in git log. I just wanted to show you it makes a commit. And then go ahead and open up this folder with your editor of choice. Okay, so.
How do you open the folder?
I would just say, okay, so if you cd inside of it, you could do, or let's see. From command line, you could just say like open space period, and then just take this and drag it onto Atom. That's like one way of doing it, or you can just go to Atom and do like file, open project. I just happen to have like a little command line utility to do it from the command line, so, but I don't think you guys installed that. So yeah, go ahead and just do file, open, and then just kind of navigate around and just say week 5 open. So did everyone get here okay? So if you look at kind of what was generated, it created a bunch of different folders. So there's this app folder, and this is where most of our application code's going to go. There's a config folder for different configuration. One of them is called environment. So typically when you have a project, you're going to be running on your own computer, which is development mode. When you deploy it to like a live site, it's typically called production. So there's a production mode. So typically you might have like, different API keys, one for development mode, one for production mode. And so you can kind of configure that all inside this one environment file. So you can see things like here's the development mode, and here's the test mode, and here's production. Those are kind of the 3 main ones. We'll look at that more later. Here's that node modules directory. So when we said Ember new, it installed a bunch of other packages to kind of create this. And so Ember is kind of made up of all these little packages, and they're all installed inside this node modules folder. We don't really ever have to hop into here. We only have to just say we just know it exists, and that's where kind of like the source code of Ember lives. There's a test folder, which we're going to look at more at tests later on, but it's kind of like we can write, typically when we test applications, we just manually click through a browser and check to see if it works and that kind of thing. But we can actually write automated tests to do this. So if you've ever heard of like unit testing or acceptance testing, Ember comes with a test suite that we can take advantage of to write automated tests. And then there's also a vendor folder. So if you need to put like third-party scripts, this is like one spot to do it. Okay, so let's kind of just run this and see what it looks like. So if you go back to your command line, I'm going to clear and just kind of go back to the top. The way we kind of run this application is we say Ember serve. And this is going to start a local server on my computer. And it's just going to hang like this. So if you get this screen, everything's good. It means the server is ready.
Could not start watching. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Oh, yeah, because I have this too. That's fine. As long as you see, like, build successful. So it says build successful, serving on localhost 4200. So if I just copy this URL and paste it into the browser, you can see here's kind of the welcome page. That's the little the little Ember mascot.
Is week 5. Delete that.
Okay, so that was kind of two commands. We said Ember new and then the name to create the project, and then Ember serve to serve up the project.
Oh, what was the line to add all those folders into the project?
All these?
Yeah.
There were two. There was Ember new, and then I said week 5. So that was the one to kind of create everything.
Okay.
And then the next one was Ember serve to just run it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's hunt around a little bit and see where like this whole homepage is so that we can start changing things. So if we go inside the app folder, then there's a bunch of different directories that we're going to get familiar with, but the first one is templates. Templates, and then there's this one called application HBS. So if you double click on this, you're going to see this double curly welcome page. This is what's called a component, which we're going to look at later. It's basically houses all of that stuff that you see on the screen. So you can actually just delete this. Keep the outlet, and we'll get into that in a little bit, and then save it. And you'll notice that the browser automatically refreshed in the background. So you don't actually have to go back to the page and do Command R, it just automatically refreshes every time you make a file change. So if we go inside here and I just kind of, just type in anything, do Command save, refresh, you can see it just changed automatically in the background. Yeah, so that, like, just because of the CLI that Ember gives us, we just get that for free. We didn't really have to do anything.
Is that running NodeMon, or is it doing its own?
It's using Watchman. Yeah, I think it uses Watchman and defaults back to like Node Watcher. I forget the name of it.
NodeMon?
It's not that. I know that. It's something else. Okay, so the main template that we see on being rendered is this application HBS. And so you're probably thinking, like, where is the index HTML? So inside this app folder, you'll see this index HTML. And this is where kind of like the head, the body tag, and all that kind of stuff is. And so you can think of this content for body. This is basically where the application template is going to get rendered. So everything between the body tags, that's where this is. This is one of those pages where you might, modify once when you first set up your app, but then you kind of rarely go back to it. At least that's how it's been for me. But just FYI, this is kind of in the end, this is the page that ends up, this is the skeleton that kind of ends up being your main index HTML. So you can kind of change like the title or whatever you want. Okay, so to get started, I was gonna kind of just show you the templating system and then the routing, so we can basically create multiple pages and have them all linked to each other. So kind of going back, I think to when we did Ajax, I showed you kind of like I simulated a single page application where one page was showing the bio of somebody on GitHub and the other one was showing like their repos or something. And you click back and forth and you kind of had the different things render. We're going to see kind of the same thing, but in Ember. So to start, okay, so the application template, so it has a file extension of HBS, and that's because Ember is using the kind of handlebars templating language for all the templating. It's a little bit different, so it's like not exactly handlebars, but initially when Ember was created, I think it was like back in 2011, it was just the actual handlebars library, but since then it's evolved. So it's similar, but it's not exactly the same. But that's what the file extension is. So HBS stands for handlebars. So the application template is kind of like the master page. So this is a good spot to kind of put your header and your footer. So let's kind of go ahead and do that. I'll just kind of add a header tag. I'll say, let's see. I'll just say week 5. Or let's do this. We'll say H1, week 5. And I'll create a footer.
After outlet?
Yeah, after outlet. And then inside here, I'll say, is it and copy or something? So the application template is basically like our master page. It's a good spot for putting our header, our footer, and our navigation. So the outlet is kind of like a special handlebars Ember feature where as we start changing pages, this is what's going to get swapped out with the content for that route. So we're going to create a bunch of different URLs, and this little outlet thing is going to get changed with depending on the content. So it might show the about page if I'm on the about page. If I'm on a contact page, it'll show the the contact template, and we'll just see that dynamically swapped. Okay, so maybe we can throw a nav on there, and then we can maybe throw an anchor. So we could say like about, and we'll say contact. And then we'll say home. Okay, so let's go ahead and make an about page. So the way we do this is we're going to go back to our command line. And I'm going to open up another tab. So you can do Command T. I'm using a slightly different terminal. So for me, it's Command D. But if you do Command T, it should open up another tab. And then from here, we're going to use that Ember CLI to generate a new page. And the way we do this is we say Ember generate route. So we're going to generate a route. We can generate different things in our system. But in this case, I'm going to generate a new route, which is a new URL. And we're going to call this about. And if you look at what it output, it says, it created a JavaScript file. And so a route you can think of as like a URL path. So when I visit /about, this JavaScript file will get executed. And then this template will get rendered. And then there's some test stuff that it generates, but we're going to look at that later.
Does Ember handle the routing?
Yes.
So there's no like React router to Ember.
It's built in.
Built in.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Okay, so if we look at what it generated, we can see inside the templates folder, there's this about thing, or this about template, and it has this outlet, and we'll kind of look at that a little bit later, but for now we can just say, let's put on here h1, and we'll say about. We'll put a paragraph and say this is the about page. Yes.
Can you do the Ember generate loop?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It was that command.
Oh, so you have to go to the week 5 folder?
Oh, yeah. Be inside the week 5 folder, yeah, in the project. Okay, so if we go back to our application HBS and we change this to /about, so we're going to change this anchor to route to about. And then when we click it, we're going to see that it actually did a full page refresh, right? And that's not really the point of a single page JavaScript application. Like, we want to do this without doing a page refresh. And so we kind of need an anchor here to kind of just do this all dynamically. And so Ember actually has this built in, and it's through a component called link to. So a component you can think of as like a custom tag with some extra functionality. And so the way this works in Ember is, you kind of have seen the when we did handlebars, but it's called link to. So I'm going to say link to the about route, and then what I put in between is the text that's displayed, and then there's a closing tag. So link to about. So right here, it's not a URL, it's just the name of the route, which I happen to have called about. And this will essentially get turned into an anchor tag. So I'm going to delete this anchor tag, save it. And if we go to our Chrome DevTools and inspect this anchor, we can see we have it did the href/about. It has like an active class because we are on the /about page in the URL. So it says, okay, I know I'm active. So it adds this extra class, and then it has the text inside. There's this extra Ember view thing because Ember uses it to kind of keep track of elements. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this for the contact page too. So I'll go ahead and just kind of copy this link to. I'll do contact, delete the anchor, and then change this to contact. And then I'll save it. And if you have your console open, you'll see that there's an error here, and it says, you attempted to define a link to contact but did not pass the parameters. Let's see. Oh, here it is. There's no route named contact. So it makes it actually impossible to have bad anchor tags in your application, just because it knows, all the routes ahead of time. So if you create one and it doesn't exist, it'll kind of spit this error out. So if we go back to our command line, we can say Ember generate. You can also just do Ember G for short. So if you don't want to type it out, you can just say Ember G route contact. It's the same thing. Now that I ran that, it kind of registered that, and the error went away, and we could see everything's working. So if we look at inside of our templates folder, we can see we had the about, and this contact. So let's kind of do the same thing. We'll just say, let's throw an H1 at the top, and we'll say contact. Maybe like a paragraph. We'll say, this is the contact page. Oops. Okay, so now if I click on these anchors, I can actually change between these two pages, and you can notice that there is no page refresh happening. This is all done through JavaScript, and Ember's kind of taking care of changing the URL every time I click on the link so that there is no page refresh, but it swaps out kind of the middle section, which was this outlet piece. So this outlet right here is getting swapped with the about template or the contact template. Now, with like you can do all this just manually yourself without using Ember, like changing the URL and stuff. And there's things built into the browser to do that, but it's just a lot more work. So it's kind of Ember just kind of gives this to you out of the box, so you can just generate pages and routes and not really have to worry about creating the infrastructure behind it. Okay, so let's also change the home one. So I'll go back and just do pound link to. So the home page they typically call index. So kind of like index HTML, the one where it's no path and it's just slash, they call it index. And so we'll create a link to, and we'll just say home and delete this anchor. And this is kind of already exists by default. That's why we're not kind of seeing an error here in this console saying like this route doesn't exist. It just kind of is automatically created because pretty much every site just has a root page or index page. But we can actually go to the command line and say Ember generate route index. And we can see, okay, now we have that same like index HBS template, which is the home page. So I can go in here and say like H1, and just say home. So there's basically 3 templates here: contact, index, about, and they're all kind of getting swapped out inside of this application outlet. So now I can kind of click on these. If I go to home, I see home, about, contact. And we have a bunch of links. Yes.
Wait, so did we do did you put the header or the H1
In
for
here?
home?
Oh yeah,
okay.
yeah. I just threw
So
it
if
in.
you don't do that, it just goes to like it just doesn't.
It's just
link
empty.
it to anything.
Like if you don't have this template, it's fine. Like nothing will just get rendered,
Okay.
but it won't throw an error.
Okay. And then also, could you have like multiple outlets, or like, is it just the one?
Typically, each template will only have one outlet, but so like in this case, application HBS had an outlet which these 3 templates got rendered into.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you notice, every time I created a route, these also had outlets.
Okay.
And so you can actually have like routes within routes, and that gets, which I was going to get into.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. One thing I also wanted to point out with these link to, so kind of going back to the HBS, or the application HBS, each of these link tos, if I kind of inspect it using Chrome DevTools, you're going to see that the one that I clicked on, so in this case, contact is the route I'm currently on. It's going to have this class of active down here, whereas these other ones don't. So every time I'm kind of visiting a page, the route that is active will have this class of active, which makes it nice for like, you want to add styling for the active route to have an underline for that page or whatever. That's just kind of like a common convention to call that class active. So makes it nice to hook into, so you don't have to figure out like what's the URL I'm on and then try and like underline or style it. It just, you get it sort of out of the box. Any questions? Okay, so each of these templates, like index, about, contact, they all have their own outlet. And so by default, it doesn't do anything. It's empty. But what it's here for is to put routes within routes. So every time you visit an application, the application route is actually getting hit, and then kind of one of its routes is getting hit. So in this case, like when I visit /about, I am technically hitting this application route, and then it kind of hits this contact route that we created. And so the contact template gets put inside here. But this same flow actually works for any route. So we could actually put routes inside the contact route or a route inside the about route. So let's just see kind of how this works. Let's imagine maybe on our contact page, like we're a big company and we have a bunch of different departments. So you can contact like tech support or marketing or whatever. So we want to have like individual pages just for each of these departments. So what we can do is let's create unique routes for each one of these. We can say Ember. I'm going to go clear and go back to the top. Ember generate route. And I'm going to say contact / let's do tech support. So the way I did this was I said the first route, contact, then /, and then the new route name. So it's basically putting a new route called tech support within the contact route. And so if we look at what it generated, it put the tech support JavaScript file within a contact folder. So it's all kind of nested under this main contact folder. So looking at like our templates, we have our contact HBS right here. But now there's also a contact folder, and this contains the tech support template. So if I were to go here, and then maybe on this page, I'll say like H3 tech support. Yes.
How do you edit the name of the route?
Oh, the name for tech support?
No, like the route. Like how do you just delete the files and regenerate them?
Wait, are you talking about like this?
Because you generate a file every time you want to create like a route.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you edit like the name of the route?
Oh, how do you edit it? Oh, like if you want to change like the URL path.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so I created tech support, which is in contact. So if you just want to add a little bit of text, so I put tech support, and then we'll go back to our HBS. So we can imagine like we'll have a link to, so pound link to, and now it's contact dot, and then we'll say tech support. So this is kind of how we say the nested, the name of the route uses dots. So I'll say / link to, and I'll just say tech support. So if I go to the page and I click on tech support, we're going to see that in this whole like middle section, we did see the contact template being rendered, but then we also seeing tech support being rendered. So the tech support template is getting rendered inside the contact templates outlet. So it's kind of like a Russian doll. Any questions? Yes.
So you put it under application.html? Yes.
The link to?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just put it there because it's like my navigation. So you can imagine I might have a nav and then this contact link would have like a drop down and then, I might have the different links or something, but I didn't do a drop down.
For some reason, when I do that, contact support, it like re-puts in the header and
Oh, like it like flashes like a refresh?
the nav. No, like it has the top 2 lines and then the top 2 lines again. It's like
We can check it out later, I guess. Okay, so you mentioned like how do you change the path, right? How do we, by default, what we're noticing is every time we create a route, the URL path is the same as the route name. And sometimes this, that might be what you want, and I usually try and do that just because it makes things simple and clear. But sometimes you might need to have like a special URL and you want to change it. So every time we've been creating a route, we've actually been modifying a file called router.js, and this sits inside this app folder. And if you open this file up, you're going to see this router map. And this is a hierarchy of our entire, of all the routes on our application. So we can see that we have the about route, the contact route, the tech support route, which is inside of the contact route. And so, you go into an Ember app and you want to see like what are all the URLs and what's like the hierarchy of everything. This is the spot to do it. You just get a really good overview of the app. And this happens to also be the place where we can change the URLs for things. So let's say I want to change the about me URL path. I can go in here and I can say comma, put an object as the second argument to this route function, and I can say path, and then give it a new path. So maybe I want to say like about-me. So now if I go to the about, you're going to see about-me in the URL. And I didn't really have to change the links in my app. I still am kind of, I'm linking to the about route, but it just happens to have a different URL than the name. Yes?
Just wondering what you put in about.js.
We'll get to that in a little bit. You can think for now, just think of it as a function so that when we visit that URL, that function will get invoked. But usually it's for data loading, which we'll get into. Does that answer your question? Or is it something else?
Yeah, sure.
You sure? If it isn't, let me know. We can.
And how do you comment in the handlebar?
How do you comment? It is. So you could do like, well, if you do command / I think I added. Actually, that's probably a good thing. So if you're on Atom, well, let's actually do this later, just so we can get through the rest. But there's a plugin I have so that Atom recognizes the handlebars templating language down here, but you guys probably don't have it. So, but this is what a comment looks like in handlebars. You can also use HTML comments too. There's a slight difference between the two, but okay, so the next part is I want to show you kind of like another feature of the router which makes it so powerful. And let's start off by actually deleting this tech support route. Oh shoot, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, so let's delete the tech support route. So the way we can delete it is, well, when we created it, it created both the template, which was here. It created a JavaScript file, which is right here. And just FYI, so like the routes folder takes on pretty much very similar hierarchy to the templates folder, so just kind of matches. So So to delete a route, kind of like with Ember generate route, we can say Ember destroy route. And so I want to destroy the contact / tech support. You can actually also do Ember D, so kind of like Ember G, but Ember D for destroy. And if you hit enter, it'll just remove those files. So remove the template, the JavaScript file, and the associated test. So I'm going to don't save. And if we look at our router.js file, you can see that it kind of removed the tech support stuff from it. Okay, so let's imagine with the contact page, we have, big company, we have a lot of different departments. So every time a new department is added, we don't really want to like Ember G, new template, and just make it individual like that. We want to make it dynamic so that we just have one template, and then, maybe that data is filled in from an API that somebody built. So what we can do here is we can say, we're going to create a route with kind of a dynamic portion. And so we'll have one single template for the department, and then we can just fill in that information from an API. So like every marketing department will have like the name and like the boss or whatever. And then so all departments will have this, and we'll just kind of reuse that same template. So we're going to create this route, and it's going to be dynamic. So we're going to say Ember generate route contact / and then we'll say department. Okay, so we go to our console. Nothing's rendering, and we have an error, and it's because I actually deleted the tech support route, but we still have the link to here. So let's change tech support to department. Let's see. Let me just actually delete this for a sec. Have it somewhere else. Oh, it's because the URL I'm still pointing to tech support. Okay, let's just go to contact. There we go. Yeah, so you might have to modify the URL because we were still on tech support, which didn't exist. Okay, so right now if I navigate to /contact /department, this works, right? Because we have a contact department route. But I want to make this more dynamic, so I could say like tech support, or in this path, or I might say marketing. This might change, but it's going to be essentially the same route, just like there's a dynamic portion in it. And you'll typically see this on a lot of applications. So let's see, what's a good one? Like, I can't think of a single page, like a public single page app off the top of my head, but once you start doing these, you start paying attention to the URLs a lot more. But if you ever see an app and it's like, it looks roughly, the URL looks pretty much the same, but then it just kind of changes in like one spot. It's kind of like a, you can think of like a variable. That's what we're essentially going to do. So we're going to say, okay, I might have one for tech support and marketing, and like this would just be the dynamic portion. So how do we change this so that it's not just, fixed, which is department right now? The way we do this is we go back to the router, and then for department, we're gonna say, hey, this is the path for this route won't be department, but it's going to be a variable. And what they call this is they call it a dynamic segment. So a dynamic segment is just, you can think of as like a URL path variable. And so we're going to say path colon string, and then in here we're going to say colon. So I'm going to say like department. I can call this whatever I want, so this will basically be the variable name. So I could say like department underscore ID. So just kind of whatever you want to give it. So if we go back to our application route, let's make a couple more links. So I'm going to say link to contact, and we're going to say contact department, but then what's the department? So in this case, we'll say we're going to give it like an extra parameter, you can say, and in this case, we'll say marketing. And so the route name is still contact.department, but what's going to get filled in for this department underscore ID is going to be marketing. So we'll create one for marketing, say link to, or close the link to tag, and we'll say marketing. And I'll just kind of copy this. And we'll say tech support. And so now if you kind of, let's see. Hold on a sec. Okay, here, change the path to get rid of the underscore ID. Ember actually has something built into it so that it understands something with like, it has a convention built into it. So if you have a path with that suffix with underscore ID, it actually means something. It's one of those things I kind of never use because it feels a little too magical. So let's just call it colon department for now. Okay, so now, so say we're on the contact page and we hover over marketing or we click it, we can see that it did kind of change it to that URL. So it took this and put it in place of, you know, this. So the entire URL for this became contact / and department. So department is still kind of the name of the route, but the path is a dynamic segment, which is the value that we supply to the link to. So if I click on tech support, you can see it got swapped there too. So these templates are actually empty, so that's why we're not really seeing like any visual changes, but we can kind of throw in, if we were to look inside here and we see contact, department, so we still have this department template, and then we go up here and we say like paragraph, this is a department. And then I kind of swap between these two let's say marketing and tech support. We do see this is the department, so it's still rendering this template, but the URL is changing, and we're still changing the route. It's just the same template. I went to the department template and then just added a paragraph. So regardless of which however many departments I add, they're all sharing the same template. So you don't have to have like a bunch of different templates and they all get out of sync. We just have one template, and then we're just changing the URL. And then from this, we can key off this to go fetch data for tech support and then render it for this same template. So it's kind of consistent. Any questions? Yes. Oh.
Did you change the ID? 'Cause that's what-
Yeah, get rid of that underscore ID. It's a little too magical, so. Yeah, Ember is kind of built upon like a lot of shared conventions. So a lot of times with like JavaScript projects, if people kind of create their own, everyone kind of creates it a little bit differently. So if you create a project and then somebody else creates a project, you hopping into that project makes it kind of a little bit more difficult because you gotta have to learn like how did they do things, right? How did they structure it? How did they name files and all that? Ember takes a very like opinionated approach and says, this is how we're going to lay it out just by default, and these are how we're going to name these files. You can change it if you want, but a lot of people don't just because they like those conventions so that it makes it easier to hop between projects or hop between Ember projects. So if you know about these conventions, it's really productive. But yeah, some of these conventions like this underscore ID thing, yeah, tad magical. Okay, so say we wanted to render different things for each of these, these links, right? So for the marketing page, I want to render different things. I'm going to key off the URL. So this is going to be my key to say, okay, I know I'm on the marketing page. I'm going to make an API call and get all of maybe like the profile for marketing. And then when I'm on the tech support page, I want to get the profile for tech support. And so we're going to have, in theory, some API that responds with the same type of JSON, but it's just the content is slightly different. And we already saw this with like GitHub's API. So if we saw like API github.com/users, and then let's see, I'll do mine. You can see like GitHub's API returns all this information, right? Login, node ID, avatar URL. But say I go to somebody else. All right, so another user, we look at it, it's the same set of data, like structured the same, it's just the actual values are different. So we can imagine when we switch between each of these links, we're going to make an API call, but we're going to use this value in the URL to say, and similar, for this, I'm going to go get this for my username, but then, when I change it for a different department, I'm going to get a different department's information. So it's just kind of pulling down data via API, but just slightly changing like the unique identifier, which is this dynamic segment here. Any questions on that? Okay, so how do we get access to that URL path or this dynamic segment right here? So every time we create a new route, we got these JavaScript files created for us. And so looking at our router, the only one that really has a dynamic segment is the department route. And so that's the one where we kind of want to pull this value from the URL. And so if we go inside the department route, so go inside routes, contact, department.js, you're going to see this JavaScript file, and it's basically a class. So we kind of looked at classes last week, and we looked at just plain JavaScript classes. So Ember is kind of, it is older, but it's still very active. And it was built, I think it started like in 2011, and it's still works. Everyone, it's still being used today. But it does have some parts that are tad legacy, which are changing. So So like the class, it looks like this. It's route.extend as opposed to, we'll call this like iRoute extends route. This is like the plain JavaScript way. So it's just a slight like difference because, you know, it's a little older, but I know right now Ember is actually working on this, and it's like in the beta branch, you can actually start using it, this syntax. So, you know, give it like a couple more months and we'll start seeing it. But overall, it's like the same concept. So we're going to extend the route class, and we're going to give it a function called model. And so they typically refer to this as the model hook, but it's a function that gets invoked when you visit that URL. So when I visit tech support, this function is going to get invoked, and it's going to get invoked with the dynamic segment. So in this case, department. And so it's going to receive these params, and we can just do a console log on params. So now if I kind of navigate between these different routes, you can see that department or params is an object where the dynamic segment is the key name, and then the value is what's in the path. So you don't have to do like any URL parsing to get a hold of this value. Just you access it through by setting up these dynamic segments. So at this point, you could do an AJAX call. We don't have APIs built, but we could do an AJAX call based on these dynamic segment values, and then pass it along to the template and then render it. And I actually think like the whole class thing does work. So we could actually do, I kind of just want to try it, but you can say export class extends route. So this is like the plain JavaScript. If I just copy this, paste, I think it works. Yeah, it's just not like, it's still pretty new, and so people, like if you look at documentation, you're still going to see the old way, but eventually it will catch up. So just like FYI, this is kind of like the eventual approach that'll be, that's plain JavaScript. Okay, so we don't really have an API for like tech support and marketing, but to kind of simulate this, what we can do is actually just use the GitHub API, and we'll just treat like the username as if it were, one of the departments. So if we go to the application template, let's actually just change these to a couple GitHub usernames. So we'll just do, you can pick anything, you can do your own. I'll just do mine, and then this one. So maybe I'll just put my name here. Less confusing. Okay, so if we go back, the link slightly changed. If I click on these, we get the username. We can even go to the dynamic segment, and we can just rename this. So we could just say like username. So now when I click between these, the object that gets console logged is, now it says username for the dynamic segment. Okay, so at this point we can take this value inside params and then do something with it. So we can make a call to GitHub's API, grab the data, and render it. Then we'll kind of, I think, be done for the day. Okay, so we'll say let URL is equal to api.github.com/users/ and then the username. And then I'm going to swap out this username with params.username. Okay, so we learned about Ajax using jQuery. So Ember comes with jQuery by default. You don't have to use it. You can actually just remove it if you want. But the way we use jQuery is we're going to say import $ from jQuery. And actually, kind of going back a little bit, these import statements at the top, these are kind of like a new way to bring in different libraries and packages into a JavaScript file. So if you've worked in other programming languages, you've probably seen something like this, where you just kind of bring them in. JavaScript now has it, and so you kind of create all these different little files, and then you can say like this file depends on this file, and this file depends on that file, and so you know exactly what things a particular file or module, what they call, needs. So in this case, this module needs the route class, and it needs jQuery. So we're going to say let's explicitly write these import statements to bring them in. But you know, the trade-off to this, or so when you have all these little JavaScript files, you can't really like ship your entire app as 10,000 JavaScript files. You kind of need to bring them all together into a single file, and that's what Ember CLI does. It kind of builds it all together. So in the end, you have like 2 script tags, and everything's minified, so they kind of remove like white space and rename variables and that kind of thing.
So do you know if it's Ember's CLI is using something like Webpack, or did they build it up?
It's using one called Broccoli.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a similar idea. Yeah, but trying to do that yourself, like having to like wire up all these files and put them into a single job, or a couple fewer JavaScript files, it's a lot of work. And like maybe like 3-4 years ago, a lot of people just wrote their own tools to do that, but pretty buggy out. Like I've done it before, and there's always like it's a pretty hard thing to do to build your JavaScript. So it's nice that it just kind of comes out of the box. Okay, so we have this URL, so we can say $.getJSON URL, and the model hook expects us. With the model hook, we can actually return any value, and we can also return promises. And so if we say return $.getJSON, which returns a promise, Ember is going to know to say, let's wait for this call to finish before rendering the department template. So it might take a little bit, but it's going to hold rendering this template before the call finishes. So if I go back and let's just like refresh, you can see just held for a sec, and then it renders. Okay, so basically our page has a single model, and we want to render this model. So if we go to the template, department HBS, we can actually start rendering all these different keys. And so I can say, let's render the avatar URL. And then we can do like name. So I'll just kind of delete all of this. And I'm going to do double curly, kind of like with plain handlebars, we could said. We're going to say model.name. And so model is a specific keyword so that the route has a model and the template receives what was returned from this model function. So in this case, we can say model, which is all of this JSON, and I can say model.name. Let's kind of maybe throw an image on here. So I'll say image source model.avatar URL. And then maybe for the alt, we'll do model.name. So we go back to our page. You can see the name and the image. So maybe make it a little smaller. So I'll say like width is equal to 150. And we'll throw like a break tag. So now if we look at this, we kind of click between at least these two routes with dynamic segments, we can see that the template's getting re-rendered with the new data from the call. But we're still on that contact.department route. Same template, same route. It just happens to have different data that we're just swapping out here. So if you kind of notice here, like, you know, when we did plain handlebars, we had to do like handlebars.compile and set up templates using that template tag and inside our index HTML. We don't really have to think about all that. It's just we're following the conventions. There's the HBS file. We just put the template there. You know, Ember wires it up for us so that all we have to do is kind of fill in the model hook. Then we can use the same sort of like double curly expressions to render data. So model is kind of like a convention and a keyword. So like typically a page will have primary data, which is the model. And the model could be like, in this case, it's a profile, right? But sometimes the model might be a list of things, like a list of users. And so then it's still called model. So you just kind of remember every route has a model. And so the template that's rendered from a route has that same specific model keyword. So it's always called model. You can change it if you want, but then you start breaking convention, and which in this case I think it's fine because sometimes you can't. It makes sense to change it, but typically you have like primary data. If you think about a page, like let's say we go to let's see what's a good page. GitHub.com. Okay, you can take this page for example. Like I would say the primary data is what's in the middle of the screen, so this would probably be your model, and then you have like secondary data, which is things in the sidebar. And so there's different ways to kind of render to load that up for the page, but think of model as the primary data for the page, which would in this case would be like the main activity that's in the center. Any questions? Yeah.
Let's say you're using like department is getting API calls from like let's say two sources. And so does the department.hbs only render if once it completes the information loading from both calls, or does it load asynchronously as well?
You can do either if you want. Like you could say, hey, wait for both of them, and then render your template, or you could say, okay, just if one of them's more primary, just render one and then load the other one after everything is loaded. You can kind of do that stuff. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. there's utilities built into Ember, so you could say like give a function two like two AJAX calls, and they both return promises, and it'll give you back a single promise once both of those have like completed. So there's stuff like that, but yeah, especially for pages where it's maybe not necessarily clear where like there's just one set of primary data, like they both feel primary, and so you just got to make multiple calls. Like, yeah, you can do that. You can say grab one of those functions and say, here's two API calls. Let me know when they both finish, and get back a single promise before I render the template. So the last thing I wanted to show was Ember has something called loading substates. So, as I'm clicking between these two links, there's a slight delay. It's because the API call is asynchronous and it takes a little bit of time. To be exact, you could actually kind of open up the network panel and just start kind of clicking on these things, and is it so minimized? Oh, there we go. Okay, so I mean they take like 133 milliseconds, pretty quick, but still like it's noticeable as a user as you're clicking through. And so maybe you want to show like a loading spinner. So the way we can do that is all we have to do is create a template called loading, and it will render that for us while the model hook is pending. So while this route is just, it takes time for it to load this, it'll instead say, okay, swap it out with this loading template, and I don't have to think about anything. So the way we can do this is inside of our templates right here, where it says contact and then department, the contact folder, just create a new file called loading.hbs. And then here we can just say loading ... And so this is also by convention, so you have to call the loading template loading. But now if you notice, when I click between these two, you're going to see them flash, right? You see that loading thing flash? So you didn't really have to write any JavaScript. All you had to do is just create this template called loading and put it in the right place. And you can pop in like a CSS spinner or something. And so this loading template you can actually put for all routes too. So if you want to do it like when you're switching between contact and about, you can create a loading template kind of in the root folder. Just put it next to the route that is asynchronous. So in this case, like the department route is asynchronous, so we'll put the loading template right next to it. So they call these the loading substate. There's also one for errors too. So if like your API call returns 500 or 400, you can also render one called error HBS, but you can check out like the docs for that. So to get all this going, like I actually, if you look at the amount of code I've written, not really a whole lot. It's mostly markup, but and running a few like command line utilities. But for the most part, it's just just kind of following the conventions. They make it really productive out of the box, so happy path sort of thing. But you can deviate if you need to. So any questions on this? I think we're going to have to push Lab 1 to next week because I didn't cover everything and it's kind of long. Yeah, let's just push it. Okay, so on here I kind of put a link to the Ember site. So if you click this, there's just to kind of, you can kind of view this and see who's using it. I know Netflix and actually LinkedIn. So this is actually the biggest public one. So if you go to like linkedin.com, and this is an Ember application, and if I open up the inspector, I've installed a Chrome extension called the Ember Inspector. So if I click on this, you can actually see a bunch of information about like this Ember application. And so I can see kind of like data and routes. Theirs is actually a really big application, because if you think about like everything that's going on here, it's probably one of the biggest Ember applications out there. But they hired a lot of the core team to actually work on it. So Ember is in very good hands. Let's see, routes. You have to refresh. I wonder if they hid this. Oh yeah, well, at least with like components, you can actually see like, we're gonna get into components later, but components are like custom tags with their own little bits of HTML and JavaScript, and it's kind of built on top of like this idea of web components, where you can actually create like basically custom tags with their own functionality and templating. But if you look at components, like you can just hover over these things and see like what components they made. So you can see like they made this box up here called feed shared. So it's kind of interesting just to see like how other people constructed it. So Ember's LinkedIn's a pretty big one. If you just Google for Ember Inspector, it's a really good thing to add. I don't expect you to like, you're going to start using it now, but it's kind of one of those, it's kind of like Chrome Dev Tools, where just kind of helps you debug Ember apps. Okay, so here's the Ember site. You can see like some places using it. And then there's also the Ember guides. I put a link here, but you can actually get to it from the home page. So if you go to Docs and then Guides, and guides are like, they kind of tell you a little bit about, each piece of the framework. So you can see like routing and templates. So we covered a little bit today, but like templates, it says handlebars basics, and you can kind of learn a little bit about the double curlies and some stuff. So it's worth reading. Maybe not like, if you try and read it all now, it might feel a little overwhelming. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. But like, it might be useful just kind of, when you get stuck on routing, go check out the routing docs, and you can just like loading and error substates. We kind of just check this out briefly, so you can just see them give a little bit more description on it. There's also API docs, so if you want to learn like exactly how a class is used, for example, we have like this route class, and it takes a model function. Like, how would you even know about that? You can kind of learn, go through here and see, okay, let's find the route class, and it'll tell you like every property and method that this thing might have. So in this case, this is model. Let's see, where's model? Here we go, model. And they'll kind of give a little bit more description. So another good spot. I usually, once you've used it a while and then you want to get into more advanced features, I just go to this type of documentation and see, okay, like what properties and methods do they have that might help me. Actually, you know what? We can still do lab 1. I just need to modify it a little bit. So I think, so originally, like, it was just going to be an Ember like a search and results page, kind of like what you did with assignment 1 or 2, where you kind of type into a form, you type in the subreddit name, it renders it, right? You do that whole thing. What we didn't cover is like, how do we handle submit events and click events and all that? So I think we can just skip this, but then just hard code it to just render the JavaScript subreddit. So just take this one, render that, don't make it dynamic, so you can get most of it, and then for the next week we can just kind of throw in the dynamic portion. So so you'll just render these properties, do a loading state. There is no error substate, and I think that's it. So yeah, just skip the search form and I'll update this to account for that. So yeah, just as a refresher, labs are slightly different than assignments. Labs are just kind of like, they're worth less, and if you get some errors on it, it's okay. Like assignments, it's like, okay, making sure you hit all the requirements, but labs, it's, you know, if you make a mistake and it doesn't fully work, but you gave a pretty good effort, you'll still get all the points. Okay, it's kind of long, but yeah, hopefully it's interesting. Any questions?
So it's due while we come out.
Yeah, same thing. I'll update this in the meantime, but okay.